everyone, welcome to my channel, My Life in Scrubs. I'm Stacy. I'm a registered nurse and I've been in healthcare for 28 years. And I just like to share my stories about my nursing experience, how I became a nurse, and tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. I was thinking today about getting out of work on time. How many of you actually finish your work at the time that you're supposed to finish it? And if so, I would love to hear how you accomplish that. What makes that work for you? Because I can tell you that I've spent many years working late after my shift was over to complete my charting. But recently, working in hospice, I have learned that you need to chart at the bedside. This is something that I've been resistant to over the years that I've been doing hospice, because I often felt that when I was looking down at my screen and asking the questions that I wasn't giving my patient the full attention. I know for example, in long-term care, which is where the majority of my experience is, I often didn't get a chance to sit down and do my charting until the end of my shift. But I found that when I was working in long-term care, that something that made me leave earlier than I normally did was when I would sit down between med passes and do my charting on a good night when nobody fell in the floor, nobody had any crazy cardiac symptoms, and nobody had an incident. So on a good night, I could sit down and chart between my med passes. And I think that this kind of charting habit about sitting down to chart after my day was done sort of carried over into my hospice career early on, because let's face it, charting is my least favorite thing to do. I love interacting with my patients. I love, having that one-to-one contact with my patients. I love being a nurse. But the thing that I love least about nursing is charting, is documentation. But if you didn't do your documentation, then it didn't happen, right? So I would be spending sometimes 2 hours after work charting, in addition to the 8 or 12 hours that I had worked, because I simply wasn't able to balance that in my day for the most part, especially if I got an admission during the day or someone fell. But what I have seen now, working in hospice, sometimes we are doing certain documentations in our home because, we have reports that we have to write weekly, and sometimes we get calls to do orders. So when you're salaried working hospice, sometimes you're charting in your home. But how do you attain work-life balance if you're bringing your work home every night? And that is something that I'm asking myself, because that is something that I struggled with over the years, is attaining work-life balance where I wasn't bringing that charting home to my house. Because, when you're out seeing patients, you're doing that all day. You're in the car driving between patients, and you can't really chart between patients in the car while you're driving, right? You can pull over to park somewhere, but it just seemed to me, while I was trying to get in a routine, that I found I had just so much time to get to the next patient before I was finished with the last patient. And it became stressful to me to think about, how am I going to get all of this documentation done by the end of the day? And I just told myself I can't do it, and I would bring it home. And that really disrupts your home life, right? Because you need to have dinner with your family. Maybe you have things you need to do after work that have nothing to do with work. So I was spending a lot of my time working after work. But that became a problem for me. And it sometimes would make my documentation late. The expectation is that your documentation is completed by the end of your shift, right? Because our documentation is how we show what we've done for our patients. It's how we show what care we're giving our patients. So when I started my most recent job and I relocated, I decided that I was going to make my best effort to chart before I came home. Because the biggest problem for me in this type of work, in the home care setting, is not bringing my work home. Because that gets old for my family, because I can't participate. Say they want to go take a walk in the park. I can't necessarily go walk in the park if I have charting to complete, because the expectation is that my charting is completed by the end of the shift. So now I'm behind if I'm charting in home, right? So I have started charting at the bedside, and what I've realized is that when I'm charting at the bedside, I'm catching those questions that maybe I didn't think of. You know, because we do our assessments as nurses, right? We check the vitals, we listen to the lungs and the heart and the bowel sounds, and we do all of the things. We ask all of the basic questions. But sometimes when you get in a routine of seeing a patient every day, maybe you forget a question that you should be asking. And you realize when you're not at the patient's bedside that you didn't ask that question, so you can't answer it. And maybe you missed something by not asking those questions at the bedside. So I have gotten into a routine with my patients of saying, hey, I would just like to sit here and do some documentation if that's okay with you. And then as I'm doing it, I kind of look up from my tablet and converse with my patients. And I see where I might have a question that I didn't ask in my initial assessment. And during the conversations that you have with your patients, you can bring up that question in your assessment. And so now when I'm teaching new nurses that are coming on to the team with me or following behind me, I say best practice is to chart at the bedside and get it done, because it really doesn't take that much more time. So our supervisors had said to us numerous times, when we look at your documentation times in the home, we want to say to you that you could have completed it at the bedside for the amount of time that you spent in the home charting. Sometimes, though, I'm still bringing home charting. If it's something complex, I had to wait for a call from a doctor for an order. There are times when you can't get the charting done at the bedside. However, I think it's always best practice to do whatever charting you can do at the bedside, and put away this idea that it's rude to the patient, because actually you're giving your patient more attention to detail by going through this assessment in real time. And that has really been one of my biggest struggles in my long career, is time management. And it's taken me a long time to get some sort of balance to that time management with documentation. I am not on a cart passing medications anymore. I am not on the floor. And I think for floor nurses, it is still very challenging. You can't necessarily always chart at the bedside in a long-term care situation. But I do know when I was working in long-term care before I transitioned over into hospice, there were times that I did find that I would be doing that med pass in the cart, and when I did that assessment on the patient, if I needed to do a note or a wound care measurement, I would do all of those things together on that specific patient, because I knew I might not be able to come back to it later. And I guess the biggest thing, the most important thing, is making sure that you get an accurate assessment. You have to answer all these questions, and if you're doing it routinely, you kind of get into a habit of knowing the assessment, right? And that makes your job faster. So some patients may only take 15-20 minutes to get an assessment done on, doing the charting at bedside. And there are times when you're in the house for an hour doing that assessment because of the needs of the patient. But you're probably going to spend that hour in the house regardless if you're doing the documentation or if you're not, and then maybe you're spending another hour at home documenting. So as many times as I tried to get into that routine and failed, I finally figured out that charting at the bedside truly is the best way to come home and not think about work anymore, because I have struggled finding a home work balance in my life for many years. And I think that that's something that families have a hard time with when you're a nurse, because they don't understand what you did. They don't understand the regulations of your job. They don't really know what you're doing, and you can't really tell them. I mean, if you're not in healthcare, you can't really understand what a nurse is doing at work all day. But your family wants to spend time with you when you get home. They want to see you, interact with you, and live with you. And if you are not able to balance that part of your life, then your family is losing out, and you're losing out on your family. And I can't tell you how many things that I missed when my son has been growing up because of work-life balance. And I guess I'll leave you with, it's always best practice to do your assessment in real time, especially in the home care setting. It will give you a better home work-life balance. Maybe you feel that stress about, not getting to the next patient, but I would say I have learned to account for that time that I might be spending in a patient's home and schedule myself around my anticipated time that I might be in that patient's home. And of course, when you're dealing with real people, it doesn't work like machines. Things are not going to run smoothly every time. You're not going to get done on time every time. But if you make it a point to try to get yourself done by the end of your day as often as possible, then you really will have a more fulfilling home life. And it's so hard sometimes to put that nursing hat off when you walk in your door, but it's so important to your family, I promise you. And I just wonder, how do you keep yourselves on track? I would love to hear suggestions that you have on how you kept yourself on time, how you got out of work on time. Do nurses get out of work on time on the floor anymore? I have seen it happen. I guess I would wonder, how do you do it? What is your trick for that? I would love to hear about it in the comments. And if you have anything that you would like to know about my line of work, which is hospice currently, I would love to hear your questions and talk about it. I thank you for watching my video, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you for watching. And if you like if you like what I'm talking about, then please consider liking, subscribing, and following. Thank you. Bye-bye.